Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Perkins Coie AR/VR survey results. My name is Ben Kalagwas, the event service lead for Perkins Coie, and I'll be moderating today's event. Today's webinar will be recorded and distributed after the meeting. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Your camera and microphone have been automatically muted. Questions for today's webinar may be submitted by clicking on the Q&A option located on the right-hand side of your screen. You may adjust the size of the presentation and presenter screens by moving the cursor at the bottom of your screen to left to right. We recommend setting it to 50% to maximize your viewing experience. If you experience any technical issues, please use the moderated chat feature or email avteam@perkinscoie.com. Jason Schneiderman, you may begin.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you all for joining us. My name, as Ben said, is Jason Sharman, and I'm a partner in the Emerging Companies Startup Group and one of the co-chairs of Perkins Coie AR/VR Industry Group. I'll be hosting today's discussion regarding the results of the Perkins Coie 4th Annual AR/VR Survey Report. Our first launch was in 2016, and we find it a great way to directly connect with the industry. Our survey partners are an important component to the survey success, and today we're joined here with this year's survey partners, Liz Hyman from the XR Association and Maddie Hollander from Boost VC. Before I get started with the panel and their introductions, I just want to remind you that we'll be recording the seminar and we'll be sending it out a week after today's program. Perkins Coie has been providing legal services of all sizes and created immersive worlds in the XR space for almost 20 years. We were one of the first people to help out MIT with some of the original patents in this space. Today, we have over 40 attorneys that advise clients in this areas like funding, formation, intellectual property, product liability, regulatory and privacy work, content creation, marketplaces, just to name a few. In a moment, I'm going to have Maddie and Liz introduce themselves and their organizations. But first, I wanted to highlight just a few findings in our survey. One of the survey's biggest findings, respondents were increasingly seeking to diversify monetization strategies and expand revenue channels for immersive technologies compared with 2019 levels. The top four areas were sales of products, up 13%, product placement, up 17%, in-app purchases, up 10%, and live events access up 17%. Another finding was when we asked about legal risks and concerns, respondents said updating privacy policies and disclosures regarding consumer data, 54%, limiting the amount of personal information from users that is collected, shared, and used, 48%, and updating consumer data portability and data retention policies, 43%. A third finding that we had, rise of AR applications. 75% of respondents agreed that the AR market would overtake VR in the terms of revenue, a 5% increase from last year. And 85% believe the AR market will surpass the VR market in revenue in the next 5 years. A fourth finding we had was healthcare is the sector garnering the most attention, investment, and interest. When asked which sectors would be the most disruptive outside entertainment in the next 12 months, 38% ranked healthcare first, followed by education at 28%, workforce deployment at 24%, and manufacturing at 21%. Now I'd like to have our panelists introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Maddie Hollander from Boost VC.
Hello, I'm Maddie Calendar, VP of Portfolio and Accelerator at Boost VC. Boost VC is making sci-fi a reality. We are a venture capital firm and an accelerator, and we invest at the pre-seed stage. We've invested in about over 300 companies in the emerging tech space and in just over 70 companies in the VR AR sector. We also invest in cryptocurrency, ocean tech, esports, robotics, jetpacks, and exoskeletons. We write $500,000 checks into 10 startups twice a year through our accelerator program. And we have quite a few really interesting companies in the VR enterprise sectors. And just two I wanted to highlight. Arthur, focusing on digital in-person meetings using virtual reality for enterprise, and 3Data, a 3D platform for enterprise IT and cybersecurity operations.
Liz Hyman from XR Association, would you mind making a quick intro?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Hyman. I'm the CEO of an organization called the XR Association. We're a nonprofit trade association. We represent the major manufacturers in the hardware and technology space for virtual, augmented, and mixed reality technologies and immersive technologies that we haven't even invented as of yet. We do our work day to day by focusing in on a few things. One is research and best practices, where we're engaging in research, collecting research, and trying to figure out how to translate that into best practices and tools that the industry can use, whether it's a developer or a platform or our hardware companies. I would encourage all of you to visit our new website, which is xra.org. We have a developer's guide that you can find, as well as this Perkins Coie XRA Boost survey. But the developer's guide is a set of best practices across a spectrum of issues and will be a living and breathing document that we continue to add to. We're looking to add an additional chapter later this year on accessibility, so we're excited about that. Other work that we engage in, convening of stakeholders to have conversations around immersive learning or healthcare or whatever the topic du jour might be. And then finally, we're out there advocating on behalf of our membership in the industry to policymakers and thought leaders and other stakeholders, because we believe that this technology is altering and exciting, and that more people need to know about it and be educated about its potential and opportunities. So really grateful to have the chance to join you all today.
Thank you, Liz. So before I jump in with some questions for our panelists, I just want to remind the attendees that on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a Q&A button. And if you have questions for the panel, please put them there and I'll propose them to them. So let me start with you, Liz, real quick, and ask you kind of what's some of the most encouraging pieces of data you took away from the survey. And then I'll shoot to that same question to Maddie after.
Yeah, well, oddly enough, Jason, I think it sort of aligns with some of the things that you highlighted. I was really excited about the diversification of the monetization models. I think that's important, because we are looking at AR applications and thinking about, in-app advertising and some of the subscription models that are starting to take place, particularly as we're all close to home. I've been fascinated to see some of the fitness subscription models that are coming out, like FitXR or Supernatural, some of the other ones that are there. It'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. But to know that the industry is maturing in a way that does support this diversification of revenue models, I think is really important, and it's sustenance for those that are developing the content, creating the platforms, let alone the hardware, which is the perspective that I bring. I would say the other really cool thing is just thinking about how AR will outpace VR. I think that I've seen some really amazing tools like real-time assist for companies that make managing some of the day-to-day problems so much easier and less expensive, because you don't need somebody to travel out to fix your engine in the whatever device you're looking at. And the other aspects of AR, that are just collaborative, that will really allow us to shrink the globe and have teams working, from one place to another in a collaborative and 3D mode is very, very exciting. And then the third thing is just the impact on the sectors. I sit in Washington, D.C., and I know that policymakers and companies and others are all focused on how are we going to move forward in a time where resources are going to be a little tighter, and to know that our tools are able to help a healthcare sector, when it comes to surgical training and reducing errors and again, mitigating some of the costs for travel. So the ROI on something like that is extensive. Manufacturing, the same thing. I mean, we could go across the board in terms of how the sectors are benefiting and are being able to come up with models and tools that are going to make them, much more lean and able to reduce some of the costs around operations in a day-to-day manner. So those were the three big takeaways that I drew. I mean, there's a lot of great information in the study. I thought the smart cities piece was really interesting too, and looking at where the leading cities are, how to match up some of our activities across those cities, I think is really beneficial as well.
Yeah. And Maddie, what were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, I was really excited about the workforce training and development, seeing that along with education and healthcare as the leaders and like how things are going to be shifting over the next few years. Obviously, we did the survey prior to COVID-19, but I think those top three categories are only going to grow. Education's one that, especially, I think there's a huge opportunity right now as we're seeing all of our education getting disrupted and figuring out how we're all going to be going back to school in the fall. There's a tremendous opportunity for digital learning to become more immersive and improved in the home or kind of not on-site setting. Workforce training, seeing how distributed teams have rallied in this time, and how companies have really stepped up their game to still continue to provide training through immersive technology has been also really exciting to see. And then in the healthcare realm, I think even now with demand on our healthcare systems, needing to create safe spaces for teams to be trained appropriately in advance of these pandemic situations and hospital systems, like I think there's a tremendous opportunity. I think that piece was really exciting for me to see the immersive technologies really stepping up and helping in the current environment today.
You know, and just wanted to point out to our attendees that the survey we did was pre-COVID, but I think we've all seen an acceleration on these sort of findings because of the pandemic and COVID. I've personally been talking a lot in the medical space and seeing a lot of funding there. And it comes down to multiples of issues of, can you train in close proximity to people? Also, access to even medical devices for the training. If you put it in a virtual world, you have virtual tools. So sometimes the issue is just getting access to, PPP stuff or the PPE stuff, or just even some medical device. So, and then with all of us kids going back to school, distance learning, there's definitely a lot of inbound inquiries around, VR, AR type education plays. So I kind of just hit on the COVID thing, but I'd love to kind of get your sense of if you've seen anything, after reading the survey, anything else that COVID might have impacted, either slowed down or is kind of hyper accelerating in your worlds, our findings. Maddie, maybe I'll just start with you again.
Yeah, I was gonna say one thing that I noticed in rereading the survey was how sort of low military and defense was on the impact, police trainings and military defense, and I think that actually may be something where VR has a much greater opportunity to step up to the challenge of helping with training and defense, either through empathy and bias training. We're seeing a lot of opportunity in that space. Companies like Vantage Point and Apex Officer who are providing specifically to enterprise and military training. So yeah, it just seems like there's these immersive situations where we need to spend more time practice, like the military and police need to spend more time practicing. And it seems like an incredible opportunity for virtual reality to step up and be the leader in bias and inclusivity training.
Yeah, and I was going to add just sort of the hot water, cold water moment. I'll put the cold water moment first, which is I was looking at some research that the Consumer Technology Association has done on impact of COVID on the tech sector overall, and they're now anticipating a drop of 2.2% in the tech sector for 2020, but they also are predicting a pretty big rebound of over 5% in 2021. And so I thought I would just put that out there. I don't think that the XR community is immune from that type of a trend this year. We saw supply chains disrupted. There are waiting lines to get some of our hardware. And it's also, I understand, been difficult for developers. I think GDC did a report recently around the impact of COVID on game developers. So I think there's, obviously challenges, but I think the exciting part about the survey, even though it was done before COVID, I think it sets up a really good base. I mean, I think the fundamentals are looking very sound for when we come back into, being able to be in person, but it also has drawn huge attention, as you guys have pointed out, to the power of this technology. I too, Maddie, am really excited about the workforce training piece. I think that is just huge across multiple sectors. And I think as 5G and AI and edge computing start to take hold as well, the potential for collaborative tools, lowering latency, having greater data transfers, all of those things are just huge. So it's a very exciting time, even though we're living through a very difficult time. I think we can all see some of the potential that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
There was,
go ahead, Maddie.
There was one piece of data that I can't find right this second, but where it was talking about where developers are getting paid, for how they're getting paid. And I think that was actually one of the more exciting pieces to me, was where they expect their revenue to come from in the upcoming year or so. And it had sort of shifted from the pilot model to actually contracts and to actual revenue coming in. And there was a recent Gartner prediction that by 2020, 70% of all enterprise will have experimented or be in the process of experimenting with immersive technology. And I think we're seeing that shift of people are paying for it, and it's starting to become real dollars on the line item budgets of these larger enterprise corporations. So that was also tremendously motivating for me as well.
Yeah, just to build off of that, I mean, it's interesting, for example, that it was Verizon Media that has just put out a sort of a package for immersive advertising ability. So it'll be much easier for companies to create on their platforms, and I'm sure we'll see this replicated elsewhere, but immersive advertising opportunities to be folded into whatever the experience or product is. So I think there's a lot of positive movement in that direction. I think I mentioned in sort of our pre-planning for this, our association now is in the process of putting out into the field another survey that I think will be complementary to this, looking at end users and sort of what they're thinking about the industry and their level of knowledge, how they're using it. And again, not to be a broken record, but the amazing feedback so far just in qualitative discussions has been around that workforce training piece. We had a fire chief talk about how this really was a genuine return on investment for them, not to mention the ability to make a much safer environment for first responders because they're able to get repetition and train in these types of environments. So we're excited to see what the flip side of this conversation is in terms of how the end users are thinking about immersive technologies.
And, just to kind of circle back, because I have a question here, just a little bit on sort of supply chain disruption or possible disruption on AR, VR devices. I just, curious if you guys have seen or heard much out there within your cohorts around that front. It's been a bit of a mixed bag with my clients. Some have experienced, some are essential and been able to provide down to the raw materials for some of these devices during this process, but also realizing that supply chains were pretty stretched at times. So it's been a bit of a mixed bag from my experience. Just curious from what you guys have seen.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it has been a mixed bag. I mean, I know, it's been in the news coverage in terms of Quest, being sold off the shelves. Yeah. But I think they're back up. And I think consistent with the entire tech sector, I think you had, a significant number of people that were involved in the components and the different pieces that were quarantined at home. They're now back at work. So, there's a bit of a lag time, but it's starting to kick back in. I wouldn't be so flippant as to compare it to the toilet paper aisle at your local grocery store. but it's sort of the same concept. There's a bit of a lag time, and I think we're starting to see things return, but we'll see what the future holds.
Yeah, I think in the earlier part of the year, there was a lot of excitement that VR could become the solution to a lot of the problems. And then there was sort of this immediate, well, where are the headsets and how are they available? I still feel like we're determining what the best tools are, as we were discussing earlier, and like what the best web conferencing tools are, what the best distributed remote work tools are. This is still, I don't think we've come up with the answers yet. So I still think there's an opportunity for VR to play a bigger role in this solution as the headsets are available.
Yeah. And then, shifting a little bit, what opportunities do you see for creators now that we kind of live in this COVID world, or maybe a bit beyond? It might be lasting a little longer than we hope, but just kind of interested in focusing on the creators in this space. Maybe Liz, I'll have you jump in on that one.
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on a few pieces. I mean, on the entertainment side, there's I think a demand for more entertainment, more games, right? As people are spending more time at home, they're looking for that outlet. And we've seen some interesting new entrants, the Alex Half-Life game. We had Iron Man on Sony. I even want to give a shout out to The Last of Us 2, which has been really well rated from an accessibility and inclusive design perspective. And I think those are all opportunities to take up. But it's continuing again, and I know I sound a little bit like a broken record, but anywhere we can help with the workforce training and trying to bring together teams, as you said, Maddie, across a geographic span, I think is going to be really valuable from a content perspective. Like, what does that look like? How do we train for different companies? I know, when you talk to Verizon, the fact that they were able to do training on high-risk scenarios amongst their staff, and there are reports out there that 97% of its in-store associates felt more prepared to handle sort of these high-stress moments, robbery attempts, whatever it might be. I mean, that's a real benefit. The other interesting in manufacturing, I know Siemens has talked a lot about the impact of XR on, and particularly AR, on aiding employees when they have to inspect circuit boards, something esoteric like that. They've had a 20 to 25% improvement in overall quality of their product. So, from a content perspective, what's going on in the specific sectors, I think, is really fascinating. Talk to L'Oreal about how to try on makeup virtually, and what does that mean for their bottom line business enterprise. So I think there's a lot of interesting models that are starting to take shape. So from a content perspective, yes, entertainment all the way, but trying to think about how to give these tools to specific sectors so that they can continue to advance their business lines in difficult times, I think is going to be a huge, huge value. And then the last thing I'd say, again, coming back to education, I think, it's challenging. The headsets are expensive, but we do have some really great AR solutions, mobile AR, and I think we need to think about how to build that more effectively and really get it out to schools. Helping teachers to learn how to use this is something that we should be really focused on so that it can become a more effective tool than it already is. And I think there's some really great stories out there. It's just building up capacity, building up the content so that teachers have these tools to help in a very difficult time when we're not sure whether our kids are going to be in school, at home. How is this all going to play out?
I also tend to think about immersive content. So whether it's concerts, music, immersive theater, or even film festivals, where are these? Where can VR play a role? And I think there's a huge opportunity there for creators to step into. Those are industries within themselves of allowing that immersion and that presence to really play a much bigger role in how we engage with each other digitally. We're seeing a lot of film festivals starting to think about, do they move into like a VR space for the parties, for the after parties, for the like ability to connect with each other as they're watching. I think there's also a huge opportunity right now to promote more human interaction and empathy using virtual reality. So how do we share stories about experiences from people from all over the world and being able to translate that? And there's a real virtual reality is a really incredible tool for really feeling connected to other humans, even though you're very different or just from a different culture or were raised in a different way. So I think that's a really incredible and inclusive tool that has a huge potential that I think is just starting to be tapped right now.
And Maddie, I want to continue down that path, on this ultimate empathy machine and, what's currently going on out in society. I think we would be remiss if we didn't touch on that. And just curious, your ideas around how AR, VR, MR can help with inclusion, diversity, and all these issues that we're sort of struggling with at the moment on a social level. Love to get you guys' take on that. I just think it's really relevant right now for us.
Yeah, I can kick that off. So a few years ago, I was on the board for UN Women in San Francisco, and as a part of our Global Voices Film Festival, we started a VR night specific to women's voices in virtual reality, both from the directing perspective and also the stories that were being told. We started it 3 or 4 years ago, so a lot of it was really just 360 storytelling experiences, but the amount you could learn about someone through that way, that narrative, was really incredible and very powerful. So I hope that as we continue to build and create new avenues for the directors and the storytellers of the world, that VR becomes a really serious option for them and very accessible for everyone to be able to film or animate rapid animation, which I think is also another tool that has become much easier with VR as well. Empathy is definitely a huge piece of virtual reality. I don't know that it always gets enough attention, but it is definitely a really important piece of feeling emotions in virtual reality. And there have been some really interesting sort of experiments on gender. There have some really been interesting experiences around race that give you a chance to kind of be in someone else's shoes and really feel what that person's feeling and sit in that spot. And I'm like getting goosebumps from some of the experiences, but I recommend kind of exploring some, and I can send some resources around later with examples, but it's definitely a powerful way to build connection and to rebuild bridges and start to have more deep and intense conversations around everything that's going on right now.
Yeah, I would just completely echo that sentiment. I know Stanford, Jeremy Bailenson, I think Courtney Cogburn, also out of, I want to say NYU, I think, School of Social Work, have done some really amazing work, particularly on racial bias and the idea that you can stand in somebody else's shoes and experience what it's like to be African American in this society. And as you said, Maddie, I'm sure along gender, along all kinds of different lines, the idea that we can walk in someone else's shoes is so powerful. And, I think more research would be beneficial just to make this a much more fulsome conversation. But that groundbreaking work has been amazing. I think we do see a need, particularly in workforce training in terms of diversity and gender training. I think there's a huge opportunity and, in fact, a real demand for tools that are going to be more impactful than, and this is not meant to diminish what we have already, but that 2D sort of check the box as you go through your annual training moment. As you say, the idea that we can not only present the facts, but also inject the emotion to the conversation, I think makes it so much more powerful and I hope effective in terms of our workforce diversity. conversations, and that's something that the XR Association would like to dig into a little bit more. I think there's a huge opportunity there.
Yeah. Well, shifting gears just a teeny bit, kind of curious of where you guys see the industry going in 2021. I mean, none of us have crystal balls, and so and I don't think any of us would have predicted where we're here today. But taking the landscape of what we know at the moment, just love to get your guys' thoughts on 2021.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier sort of that you need to look at it within the context of where the tech sector is going as a whole. So I was enthusiastic to see the CTA survey that there will be a good rebound. But I think overall, the fact that there is diversification of revenue models, the fact that that we're talking about really impactful applications of XR technologies, I think we're starting to come into a level of maturity that is exciting, that hopefully groups like Boost are going to put a little more money into the kitty as we go along, because it represents a good return on investment as we seek to build things out. I mentioned earlier, I think the development of 5G, edge computing, AI is going to be very central to where we're going as an industry. And when I talk to people in Washington, D.C. and policymakers, I want to make sure that they know about this technology, that they are putting this in the same bundle as 5G, AI, IoT, quantum computing. It all needs to be part of the same conversation. So for all of you that are listening, I mean, I hope that as you come in contact with folks that are stakeholders and thought leaders and whatnot, that you're sharing your enthusiasm for the technology, that this is all one big conversation and we need to be a part of it. So.
Oh. Maddie, how about you? 2021 kind of insights?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that
or 21, I guess. Sorry.
Yeah, one thing in this experience that I think we need to think about your headset as a personal tool in your tool belt, not necessarily like a cell phone or a computer, not thinking of it as something that necessarily is a shared resource. I think the prices are starting to come down to a point where they're being competitive with these other tools in the enterprise tool belt for work and work from home, from work in the office, and I'm hoping that the line item starts to even out where like I have a cell phone, I have my laptop, and I have my VR headset, is sort of a toolbox that enterprises are starting to take advantage of. So I'm hopeful that becomes the norm in 2021, where that becomes something that is more valid. And then I'm also really excited about seeing productivity apps start to come alive, because I think that kind of blends the consumer and the enterprise. So there's a real opportunity for productivity tools to kind of take the consumer headsets over to the enterprise space and allow people to start integrating work and play a little bit more. So I'm hoping that will take a lot of the gaming kind of people who came in for the games, which is a huge and valid reason to come into VR, start to mess with, how could this be useful to me in the work environment? And I think productivity and mind mapping and thinking spatially can really be valuable when you're working on research, when you're working on a presentation, when you're teaching a class, when you're presenting something and you really want to walk someone through your presentation versus click through a slide on a presentation. So I'm really excited about that. Those intersections that start to blend the gaming headsets with the enterprise headsets and start to move things back and forth there.
And I'll just make a couple points on the legal side. I think we're going to continue to see a focus on privacy issues and biometric law as we gather more and more data, as we move into education and the medical field and becomes more ubiquitous. This technology is going to become a big concern for folks because we can just gather a lot more information. So I think that will continue to have a lot of emphasis for companies in this space. I think in the last year or so, probably even pre-pandemic, fundraising did sort of drop off in this space a bit from 2018 to 2019. Most of that was directed towards very large companies. But there's these amazing patent portfolios out there that have kind of almost gone by the wayside with some of these dead companies. So there could be some consolidation around patents. There could be some more sort of, for lack of a better word, patent trolls trying to exert some power if we start to see some of these headsets garner some control, or maybe the bigger companies buying up some of these really interesting patents, because there's been some amazing patents out there, but a lot of the companies just didn't quite survive or are struggling at the moment. So there could be, again, more emphasis on protecting your IP and patent litigation and finding other avenues of revenue along that front. And I do think there's going to be some consolidation and roll up in some key areas as well. Some teams are looking with some more financial resources, bringing teams together so they can tackle the similar goals or common goals in and around, either bringing it to education space or whatnot. So, I think we'll see a bit of an uptick of sort of some consolidation there as well. Those are just some observations I've already seen, conversations around board meetings and whatnot that I've had.
I would add to that from like the early stage investment side, and I don't have the stats in front of me, but I think there is still a lot of movement in the VR space. I do think that the later stage VR is starting to really be focused on traction and revenue, and I think there's a lot more companies making money in VR right now than there has been ever, obviously. And so it's a really exciting time because we have these sort of role models and leaders, and we're starting to see like standards in revenue, and I'm sure Liz has more insight on that. But I think we're seeing the momentum building, and these companies move up stage by stage of the investment process. And 5 years ago, we only had a handful of companies that had ever made it, to a Series B, and now we're starting to see a lot more later stage investment rounds happen, and so it's moving the whole industry forward in a really exciting way.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. I'm going to turn to a couple, so we don't lose some time here. I'm going to turn to some of our questions that our attendees have sort of proposed. One of them is, how are you seeing the large technology companies shift their strategy in regards to XR? Maybe Liz, I'll shoot that one to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously you have companies that came in through VR specifically that I think are really starting to diversify their approach from a technological perspective. I think Facebook has had some interesting announcements around AR and form factors in that regard. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think Google obviously has been really strong in sort of the AR space, the mobile AR. They recently made a purchase that I thought was interesting in terms of hardware, so we'll see where that goes. But I do think that XR is sort of this umbrella term, right? And obviously my organization is named for XR, and we want to see that used more ubiquitously in terms of being the umbrella, because there are immersive technologies that we may not even know about at the moment, and we need a way to sort of have a moniker that's easy to use, and we can explain to various audiences what we're talking about. But when you think about spatial computing and where we're going with 3D representations, sort of that metaverse conversation, that's going to be an interesting place where we see some developments over the next, I would say, 3 to 5 years, and maybe sooner. I'd keep an eye on that space. So, I think of it as just a wonderful way of kind of capturing a very broad and diverse conversation for things that we don't even know about at the moment, which is kind of cool too.
Maddie, did you want to add anything or add to that? I thought so too. One more question. What's your best estimate for standalone, untethered, mixed reality glasses with affordable pricing for consumers? Sounds like Apple, Facebook, Google, and others mostly focused on AR info display for the next few years until, say, 2024. Are optics form factor challenges, longer out hurdles? Question mark.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to somebody like a Michael Abrash at Facebook, I think they're looking, and Clay Bavor at Google, and all the different leaders in the engineering space. There are really interesting challenges in terms of stepping up the the computing power so that the form factor becomes a little smaller, the connection to 5G and edge computing in that regard. So there's still some major steps ahead in terms of how we're going to think about the form factor. I think there's going to be diversity in terms of what people are interested in. The average, the person that wants an easy, frictionless experience may take a Quest, whereas somebody who wants really high-level gaming and incredible graphics might go for a Valve Index or some tethered option. And then from a gaming perspective, obviously PSVR and how they're positioning themselves. So it's really sort of a preference point at this point in terms of where people want to go with the different technologies. But certainly, as the technology proceeds, as some of these challenges around optics in the form factor start to come down, the pricing, obviously, more of those options will be available. I think Maddie had said earlier, I think the goal here is that this is going to be like your cell phone, that it's another tool in your toolbox. And that's where people are headed. And the technological challenges are very much front and center for all of these companies. They're trying to get there as quickly as they can.
I feel like a lot of the questions I have from new clients are sort of inbound requests or sort of this touchless world, and XR seems to, feed very well into it. And another sort of interesting observation is we also, when we sort of moved into this pandemic, some of us were more comfortable than others on these webinars and web chats and whatnot. And now it just seems like commonplace and to the point where, there's even a term of Zoom fatigue that we're doing it. And it just seems like hopefully the next level is, this more engaged spatial computing, avatars and whatnot, as we kind of try to keep pushing the envelope for something a little bit more engaging than Zoom calls or even this format of a presentation, right? Just curious, your guys' thoughts on, taking what we've been sort of forced into, again, this COVID world, and the technology and how we've sort of digested it to date, this current one, and learnings for the industry going forward that, might help sort of accelerate adoption.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that comes to mind right away is for many Americans, they are restricted to a very small environment right now, just from a public safety point of view. And, the idea that you can be in an immersive environment, at the Grand Canyon or skydiving or doing things, I mean, we've talked about it before COVID, but now it has a particular resonance in terms of, giving us a sense of connection to spaces and places that we might not otherwise be able to experience. I think that's something to build on, post-COVID, current COVID, post-COVID. And I think that helps with adoption as well, because people are yearning for that type of experience. They're willing to make the leap. I need to be, develop my avatar. Or I was teasing with my team at XRA. I went into Spatial and put on my photo onto the avatar there, and I felt like I had very bad plastic surgery, but it's a more realistic avatar than others. So I think the attraction to the connection and the space is going to be an important ingredient in adoption, and we should take advantage of that, because we believe in the power of this technology. This is the time, I think, to really get out in front of people and share with them that experience and let them have it, and then know how to operate going forward.
Yeah, I also think there's a huge opportunity for communities. So we've even in general, like most meetup groups or things have usually are happening two-dimensionally. Until you meet in person, but then you sort of restricted by geolocation, or timing or schedules. And so I think there's a real opportunity for like these online groups to have more physical presence, versus just two-dimensional presence, in communities. And there are a lot of really interesting tools that have been facilitating, and building communities. Um, and I just blanked on what I was going to say next. So
No worries.
there's an opportunity for communities.
I also wanted to add to that, which is, this is now the 30th anniversary of the ADA, and there's been a lot of conversation around accessibility and inclusive design, and again, making these communities and these experiences open and available to the broadest number of people, I think is just, it's an imperative. We have to do it. I know our organization is working on trying to come up with some guidance that would be helpful. I just participated in and am involved in the XR Access Initiative. This is a huge segment of our society, and this shouldn't be an afterthought. We need to be thinking about these things now as we build the technology.
That's a great point.
The one last piece that I was going to add to that was around soft skills and soft skill training. I think there's a huge opportunity to take the advantage of the time that people have to be able to better themselves. And there's a lot of tools out there to improve public speaking, to practice DJing in VR, learn a new skill completely, and have an audience and perform either live on Twitch or bring in your own music. I think there's just a really cool opportunity to learn new things, and I think that means I could be DJing with someone in England or in Saudi Arabia, and we could be at a party together, and learning together. And I think that's a really interesting kind of removing political boundaries and kind of government, country boundaries, and trying to bring people together in a new, unique way.
Absolutely. So I know, Maddie, you're part of Boost VC, but wanted to kind of ask you both, like, if you were an analyst or you had a fund, where would you be looking at and seeking to make investments now in this industry? Obviously, these things usually pay off 5-10 years down the road, but where do you guys sort of see more dollars need to be directed, and is it in line with the survey, or now have you sort of thinking again, I guess 2021, but more funding, more funding focus. Where does dollars need to go, and where would you place your bets in some sense? And Maddie, since you're at Boost VC, I'll pick on you first.
Yeah. I think Liz has laid on the case for workforce training pretty strong. But I think honestly, it would really be looking at that opportunity, and continuing to look at that opportunity as a huge market, and just how many inefficiencies, both in manufacturing, supply chain. There's a lot of need for really skilled technical people, in a VR setting, to be training people on the ground actually doing the work. I think there's a ton of really interesting use cases there.
Yeah, I mean, I won't go back to the workforce saw. I mean, I definitely agree with that. I do think that collaborative tools in general are important beyond just workforce training. How we can bring teams together to make them more productive is going to be vital. So in the manufacturing space, I think there's a huge opportunity for that. I think beyond sort of the training piece of healthcare, what's going on with things like pain mitigation would be really interesting, or use of it as treatment, and obviously that brings in a regulatory frame that would need to be discussed, but it is already sort of a valid conversation in the healthcare space. And another thing that was pointed out to me recently is trying to figure out how the regulatory spaces need to be updated to accommodate some of these conversations. So if I were thinking about investment, I'd be looking at where some of those conversations are taking place, because obviously updating regulatory frameworks then help in terms of the ability to proceed with some of these novel uses. I continue to think entertainment, in terms of what is going to be fun experiences for people is going to be a huge driver of the market. And then obviously the education piece. So I think lots of good opportunities out there for 2021, let alone in the future. So
I think also with the rise of like TikTok, Twitch, like online gaming, there's a huge opportunity for content creators, like everyone wanting to be their own content creator. And so either animation, rapid animation, and streaming of like animated characters, I think could be really interesting as well.
Yeah, I mean, what you've seen with Snap and Google giving people their own superpowers in AR, right? To bring up the panda in the room or whatever it might be. That's fun. People like it. They're going to continue to use it. I think the social VR piece is going to be really interesting as more spaces come in online and available to people. The fact that you can have that intimate conversation or the group conversation and have that connection and contact with people, whether you're, in a more realistic avatar or a fun avatar, however it works, I think people are going to be attracted to that.
One thing we didn't touch base on too much in the survey, but sort of interesting, is just arts and artistic expression in and around this space, and just the avenues of just expanding that culturally. Sorry to kind of deviate a little bit, but just curious about your thoughts a little bit around artistic expression and culture and how we can leverage this technology. And again, I think when we create art, we create a better society. In various formats. Just kind of curious your thoughts real quick, and then we'll wrap it up with your closing thoughts.
Well, right after I started at XRA, one of the first things I did, I took the train up to New York City and I went to XR for Change, as part of Games for Change. And there were some amazing array of artists that were presenting there in terms of expression and taking that artistic bent and putting it into this 3D environment was really inspiring. The one thing that I've always sort of thought is interesting, and it'll be a transformation of the cultural taste of the citizens across the globe. If you're a director of a movie, you have a point of view. You're asking the viewer to follow what your point of view is. And VR in a 360 environment now gives the viewer the opportunity to have the point of view. What do they want to see? How are they going to engage with the scene? And I think, from an artistic expression point of view, that's fascinating to me in terms of how filmmakers are going to adapt to that. I think artists in 2D mediums are just loving this because it gives them a third dimension to be able to express themselves. That's fantastic. So I'm really curious to see how this is all going to play out.
Yeah, I'm also really curious about immersive theater mixed with like escape room style media. So where we each have a role to play, but there is a storyline or a narrative that we are on the journey with. So it's sort of like that Netflix experiment where you could pick the next storyline, the pick and choose your storyline, but you're making live decisions with your friends in a story journey. It's almost like being at Disneyland on a roller coaster ride, but actually actively participating in what happens next versus having it all happen to you.
Yeah.
So
it makes everyone a director.
It makes everyone an active participant versus just a consumer.
Well, we're getting towards the end of the time here, so I would love just to maybe if you have just a parting thought or one takeaway from the survey or this call. I know we've addressed some current topics that weren't in the survey, but wanted to stay topical. maybe Maddie, do you want to just start off with just maybe a quick?
Yeah, so I think part of being a part of this and learning both like the question that Mark asked about the consistency of like future survey responses and where we would expect diversions. I think just this was a huge learning experience to understand like pre-COVID, post-COVID, like how questions and responses could change so dramatically, or not, in a lot of cases in this survey. And I think that the trends that we talked about today really feel true even with COVID, and the current environment, as like a huge opportunity. And I think that was a lot of what we were looking for when we were writing and working on and thinking about the outcome of the survey, was presenting the opportunity, both for investment, for developers, for creators, to see this as a new medium for training and improving human lives. And I just can't, I still think it resonates, and it still really is something that I'm very excited about, I guess, moving forward.
Yeah, and I was going to do the same thing. I thought Mark's question was great, and I do think when you're trying to create a survey tool like this, you want it to be somewhat timeless, right? And to get at a series of questions that you can benchmark year over year. So it will be interesting to do this again next year, and it looks at a snapshot in time. And but I do think, as we've all said, that what I took away from this year's survey is that the fundamentals are good, and that it bodes well for seeing our way through a very difficult time that everybody is experiencing, but also highlighting the unique power and opportunity of these technologies, that there really is, I think, a discovered demand for what this is all about. And we just have to continue to innovate, and to provide the tools and the content that are compelling. And I think we're on that pathway. So I was really honored to be a part of the survey, and appreciate the opportunity to join you today on this discussion, particularly because it's a little out from when we actually did it. And so it's given us a perspective over, hey, was this still relevant? And I would say absolutely.
Oh. And my quick takeaway is it takes a whole community to push AR, VR, XR forward, and that's from investors and XRA, and from lawyers and developers and customers and creators and content thinkers, and all of you who've been attending this meeting. So lean in and keep supporting, and we look forward to doing the next survey. And wanted to say thank you so much to Liz and Maddie for joining us, and their support from their organizations. And this is, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Maddie. Thanks, everyone.